This is Counterpoint.
Today we look into EU funding for the Palestinian Authority and civil society.
And I was tabling an amendment saying we do not want the Commission to fund school books that promote violence and anti-Semitism and martyrdom. And that was successful, and in the Budget Control Committee, and finally in the plenary, which is quite important, not about being pro-Israel or anti-Palestinian. Some of the school books, also supported by EU funding, promote anti-Semitism and actually violence. And we cannot have that.
The EU envoy to Ramallah said in his letter that if those people were linked to terrorist organizations are as individuals not listed, EU funding could continue. It sounds like he created or interpreted this as a technical loophole.
At least 7.5 million euros that went to a handful, 10 organizations that either have proven links to terror organizations or spread hateful conspiracy, anti-Semitic theories through their activities. If the EU as the donor that comes with praiseworthy intentions and motives does not make sure that the money goes towards building a sustainable society or providing relevant aid, then we will just continue to perpetuate the problem. And the ones who will suffer the most at the end of the day will be the Palestinian society themselves.
Welcome to another episode of Counterpoint, our second show now recorded at a safe social distance rather than in the TV studios of the European Parliament. Today we look into EU funding for the Palestinian Authority and civil society. Specifically, we want to discuss whether the EU has the right vetting procedures and policies in place to ensure that the various organizations and programs supported by EU taxpayer money really always furthers the goal of a negotiated two-state solution. To that end, we are joined by Niclas Herbst, a German member of the European Parliament from the EPP, who is Vice Chair of the Budget Committee, and live from Jerusalem, Olga Deutsch, Vice President of NGO-Monitor, a non-governmental Israeli research institute promoting transparency and accountability for NGOs. Niclas, let's start with you, please. You submitted an important amendment which Parliament adopted to the discharge report of the 2018 budget that specifically raised concerns about incitement in Palestinian textbooks. What exactly are the problems in the Palestinian textbooks, and what does your amendment say?
Well, you probably know much better than me that some of the curricula, some of the school books, also supported by EU funding, promote anti-Semitism and actually violence, and we cannot have that. And exactly 1 year ago I was elected into the European Parliament, but I know that other parliaments tried as well to get the Commission to take a closer look, to put money into the reserve, not to spend money on such kind of school books. And we weren't successful so far, but this time we took the discharge, as you said, of 2018 of the Commission, and I was tabling an amendment saying we do not want the Commission to fund school books that promote violence and anti-Semitism and martyrdom. And that was successful, and in the Budget Control Committee, and finally in the plenary, which is quite important, but because, you know, not only because of the topic itself, but also because the European Parliament hasn't been a very good friend of Israel, let's be honest. And there are parts of this Parliament who do not see the problem and try to look away. And we had about 60% of the members of Parliament say, okay, now it's enough. Now we are going to take a closer look, and we want the Commission to act on school books. And I think that's a very basic and a very important success.
Right. I am always astounded that these sorts of issues are often seen as, by some people as this is pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian, when we are talking about incitement in textbooks, which cannot possibly be in the interest of any society. and certainly will not be conducive to any, peaceful solutions. So that cannot possibly be in the interest of Palestinians to continue inciting their children. So in your conversations with other members of parliament, or maybe also with members of officials from the Commission, do you see sort of a slight change that is also reflected in the support that you got now in the end?
I hope so, but that's because I'm an optimist. I mean, of course, it's a success. It's 60% of the almost 60% of the parliamentarians say it's enough. But on the other hand, we have still 40% saying promoting violence in school books. Well, it's not that bad, and you have to see the background and so on. And
right.
I don't, as you said, it's not about being pro-Israel or anti-Palestinian or whatever. I mean, extremists all over the world try to get the youth,
right.
try to indoctrinate youth, and that's such an important issue to stop it from the beginning. Because if we want peace and if we want to have a solution, we need a peaceful youth and not angry young men. And
right.
so I am optimistic, to answer your question, but it's still a lot of work and everyday work, I would say.
Right. I know that Federica Mogherini, the former HR High Representative, actually announced an investigation last year into Palestinian school books. I don't assume that this investigation is already concluded or that we have any news on it, but that's certainly something to follow up as well. Olga, let me turn to you. Earlier this month, the Israeli Foreign Ministry summoned the EU ambassador to Israel over a letter his colleagues in Ramallah actually wrote to Palestinian NGOs and which your organization discovered. Could you bring our viewer up to date on what this story is about?
Of course, Daniel, it's a peculiar issue, and in a way it is part of the same story that you just discussed in the context of textbooks. We are witnessing a sad reality that EU, but EU is not alone there. EU is joined by many of the EU member states. Governments are funding the PEA and the Palestinian society by and large without much checks and balances in place, which then creates a situation in which generations and sectors, entire sectors of societies are taught to hate, that martyrdom is the only way to move forward or the only way to proliferate within the Palestinian society. And we are right now so far away from talks about peace or two-state solution that any official statement on that front is a little bit out of place or out of context in terms of what happens in reality. So as you said, on March the 30th, the head of the EU representative office to West Bank and Gaza issued a clarification letter, that was the title of the document, to an umbrella organization of 135 Palestinian human rights and humanitarian NGOs. Most of the biggest Palestinian NGOs are members of this umbrella organization. And to try to simplify the matter to your viewers, the letter basically said the following: even if some of the people employed by your NGOs or people participating in your activities or sitting in the boards of your NGOs have ties to terror organizations that are on the EU terror list, the list of EU restrictive measures, the funding from the EU to your organization will not be harmed. I mean, it is in a way such an outrageous statement that it is very difficult to even comprehend it. What happened following the discovery and the exposure in the Israeli media is that the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs summoned the EU ambassador in Tel Aviv, which is not something that happens every day. So it is also important to put it in a broader diplomatic context. the Israeli ministry condemned the letter and insisted that it will see through that this issue is raised. Now, as you know, because AJC and Transatlantic Institute in Brussels have also been involved in raising the awareness on this issue in Brussels, many members of the European Parliament have taken the issue and raised it in various committees and through parliamentary questions, letters to Borrell and relevant colleagues. And only last week in the Foreign Affairs Committee, Commissioner Vorlai basically, in an answer to a question, in a first, I might say, announced that the EU missions in Tel Aviv and East Jerusalem both, respectively, have already been ordered to run an investigation. I'll let you ask your next question, but I will just finish this part while saying that while that is very good, that is far away from satisfactory.
Right, right. No, definitely a step in the right direction, and we also applaud that progress. Maybe it's important to give a little bit of that background here as well, is that so the EU envoy to Ramallah said in his letter that if those people who are linked to terrorist organizations are as individuals not listed as terrorists, then that's sort of, so to speak, not a problem. EU funding could continue, and he added helpfully that actually there are no individual Palestinians listed, only organizations. So it sounds like he created or interpreted this as a technical loophole.
Well, I think it's much graver than that. If we took it out of the Palestinian context and put it into a context that might be a little bit more relevant for the global audience who are not experts on the Arab-Israeli conflict and so on, and it would be the equivalent of the EU ambassador in Turkey, for example, issuing a clarification letter to a Syrian umbrella organization for Syrian NGOs and saying, even if people who work for you guys or sit on your boards or enjoy your activities are connected to ISIS, as long as none of them is on with their name and family name on our list of terror organizations, we have no issues funding your NGO. So that, just to put it in a broader context and to understand the magnitude of the issue, we have been documenting this for years, and only if we look into the relevant EU grants in the last 3 years that were given to a variety of Palestinian NGOs, we have come up with an amount of at least 7.5 million euros that went to a handful, 10 organizations that either have proven links to terror organizations or spread hateful, conspiracy, anti-Semitic theories through their activities. I mean, this cannot constitute promoting human rights or humanitarian work in no context.
Right, and just the other day, Germany's Bild Zeitung reported that Israel arrested 3 PFLP members linked to a terror attack that killed an Israeli teenager and who worked in high positions for EU-funded NGOs. So this is not a theoretical issue here. And Niclas, to bring you into the discussion here on this issue, I mean, it looks very similar to the issue that you dealt with when it comes to textbooks. Of course, that is about money going to the Palestinian Authority as part of the budget support. But here we are seeing problems with money going to civil society. How can Parliament, how can your budget committee bring themselves in to try to bring more oversight into this matter?
Well, first of all, this anti-terror clause that we're talking about is pretty new. But of course, we have too much tolerance among large parts of the Commission, actually. And we need to change this. I also tabled an official question to Mr. Borrell. I'm looking forward to having the answer pretty soon. But you know, if you are a farmer, for example, or if you're working for an SME, or if you are working for an NGO and you want EU funding, you need to do a lot of paperwork, and a lot of suspicion is, you know, is generally there. And here we have a situation where the Commission says, or at least parts of the Commission and representatives of the Commission, as long as you're not with first name and last name on a list, well, it doesn't matter. We don't look at our own rules. That's not EU. EU works differently in other fields, and you have to do a lot of paperwork. And here you just have to be on a list. And I'm asking myself, what if only your last name is on this list as a terrorist? If your first name is spelled wrong, that's much too much tolerance. We have this clause for a reason. It's new, but we have it for a reason, this anti-terror clause, and we need to stick to our own rules, and we will follow this. And there are a lot of parliamentarians, and I belong to them, who are saying this is not right, and we have to change this. And I'm looking forward to the Commission acting, and we will get them to act.
Right, and if I may throw into that mix of funding problems, we know that the Palestinian Authority is paying Palestinian terrorists a salary which is indexed to the length of their prison sentence. In other words, the more serious their crimes, the more money they get. In some cases, it's a multiple of what an average Palestinian salary is. And some have calculated it's about 7% of the PA budget, which in turn, to a large extent, is funded by EU taxpayer money. And again, I'm just asking, I mean, I don't understand why anybody who considers him or herself pro-Palestinian would, you know, try to, protect this situation or prevent any criticism against this practice, when this is clearly against the interest of ordinary Palestinians who are deprived of funds. 7% of the budget, instead of going to really needy Palestinians, goes to terrorists. But also, again, are we trying to promote peace and the two-state solution, or are we, or is the Palestinian Authority here clearly inciting to violence and terrorism? And to this day, we haven't really tackled this problem. This has been going on for many years.
You're absolutely right. And I couldn't say it better. If you are pro-Palestinian, you have to change this practice. You have to change violent textbooks for young pupils. You have to change, funding of terrorist organizations and organizations linked to terrorism. If you're pro-Palestinian, you have to change this. And you're absolutely right. I do agree with you. We have to focus on this issue. And I think there's a wrong tolerance among those who positively have a good feeling or want to help Palestine, which is a good thing. But that doesn't mean you can afford a wrong tolerance. This is what we're witnessing here, right. And we have tolerance on the it's a wrong tolerance, and we have to fight this.
Right.
Maybe to add to those numbers that you just presented, and to put it in a context right now, or around about a month ago, the EU announced an emergency COVID-19 aid package for the Palestinian Authority of 71 million euros, which is an incredible amount, and it is praiseworthy because the EU wants to help the Palestinian society. 10% of that, almost 6.9 million, will go to NGOs, and I think that is core of the issue, is that if the EU as the donor that comes with praiseworthy intentions and motives does not make sure that the money goes towards building a sustainable society or providing relevant aid, building better healthcare capacities, etc., then we will just continue to perpetuate the problem. And the ones who will suffer the most at the end of the day will be the Palestinian society themselves, because instead of getting proper institutions and building democracy, to moving forward, be able to have some sort of a state, we will just perpetuate on one hand dependency, and on the other hand this hateful sentiments and culture that will prevent any type of coexistence with the Israelis.
Right. I think it's certainly part of the larger problem why we haven't seen a lot of progress in the so-called peace process. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much both to you, Niclas and Olga, and please thank you for tuning in, and hope to see you in our next episode. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.